Hello, it's John Heaton, and today I'm going to have a look at George Harrison's solo albums and give them a ranking. I haven't done this for several years, and it's going to be a bit different today because my mood today, for various reasons, is a bit different to how it was 8 years ago, and hence the ranking is different. Not massively different, but if you've watched the previous one, you'll notice that there are a few differences, and this was sparked off. Actually, the whole subject of doing this video was sparked off by me listening to a very impressive one of Fabcast podcast things which I told you about on the last video. So I listened to the one about life and death, about John's murder, with Jack Douglas, Fred Seaman and Elvis Costello all interviewed, and that was interesting. And then I was listening to further ones about Back to the Egg, and then there was one about George Harrison. But it wasn't devoted to one of his albums. It was just a 2-hour commentary on his entire career. So it was a bit frustratingly shallow because they had to cover a lot of ground in 2 hours. During that podcast, they said that Living in the Material World was inferior to Red Rose Speedway and Mind Games because George's palette is somewhat limited. And they said George is one colour. It's a beautiful colour, but it's only one colour. And hence the variety on his records was lacking. And then they went on to say how Red Rose Speedway and Mind Games were the opposite. And I just found that a bit of an unfair comment, and actually at odds with what I think, because I've always had a huge soft spot for Living in the Material World. It was the first George Harrison album I believe I bought. I think it was in the Harrods sale on cassette back in 78, early 79 perhaps. And in the same podcast go on to basically dish Material World, Dark Horse and Extra Texture, and then rave about the Warner Brothers George Harrison output, and one of the guys actually said Gone Troppo was George's best work, which is a bit of a stretch, but it's his opinion. But then the other guy said the Self-Titled was his favourite, so I was in tune with that. But overall, they called George Harrison's sound, post All Things Must Pass, thin, and they had quite an uncalled for dig at the musicians that George uses in the 70s. They had a dig at Klaus Voormann. Jim Keltner's drumming, they said, was sort of not impressive and didn't have any feel. Didn't like Nicky Hopkins' piano. Didn't like Gary Wright's keyboard work either. And I thought, bloody hell, I'm going to respond to this. So I'm going to tell you what my ranking is as of today. As I say, it's different to how it was back then, and it'll probably be different the next time I do this. So there are 12 records to choose from, and it's no surprise, I think, that this one, Electronic Sound, comes in the bottom. I can't even make it through the record to listen to, and I've got nothing to say about it other than the fact I don't think it should have been released. I think it's taking the piss, quite frankly, to release it and charge the fans money. And then this album is second to bottom, and this is an improvement on Electronic Sound. It came out first, and this soundtrack to a movie called Wonderwall, which is a very tedious movie. I tried to watch it on YouTube, couldn't get all the way through it. The album has its moments. I don't really call them moments, but it's got some listenable pieces, and I think Party Seekum is quite good, and Red Lady 2 is not a bad little keyboard bit at the beginning, but on the whole it's not an album I return to very often. That was number 11. Number 10, this is going to shock some of you, but it's just my opinion. It's Cloud 9 from 1987. I quite liked this album when it first came out. I lapped it up, I played it a lot, and just not an album I go back to that often. I just find some of the songs on it annoying, such as the single Got My Mind Set on You. I really can't stand that. The production I don't find as annoying as some other people. I just don't particularly. I think George is trying too hard to make a hit album, and it shows. And when this album came out, George, in contrast to his normal image of, like, I'm a gardener, I plant flowers and watch them grow, not interested in the music business. Here he is on every radio show under the sun promoting Cloud 9 and going to the other extreme. And I just found that a bit over the top. And a lot of the songs on the album for me are a bit too poppy, like This Is Love and I Know You Love It, James Griffiths, I'm sorry. And even When We Was Fab, I just find it annoying with that keyboard bit. after a few listens, it gets a bit annoying. So, Breath Away from Heaven is nothing special. Wreck of the Hesperus, I mean, I do love it. That's What It Takes, and Devil's Radio. Those are my two, and Fish on the Sand. Those are probably my three favourite tracks. But anyway, Cloud 9, decent album, but number 10. Number 9, we've got Gon Troppo from 1982. And this is another mixed bag, because it starts off dreadfully with the single, in my opinion, the dreadful single Wake Up My Love, although some people love it. And then you've got From the Ridiculous to the Sublime, going from that to That's the Way It Goes, one of his greatest ever solo tracks. And then Mystical One on side 2 is just a song to die for. Gon Troppo, the title track, is fun. Other than that, it's a little bit underwhelming. And you've got some very weak tracks like the Beatles' Reject Circles and Baby Don't Run Away. Just dispensable in my opinion, but the strong moments are great. And number 8, we've got Brainwashed, the posthumous album released in 2002. And again, this does have a couple of songs which kind of get on my nerves, like the title track. I know you love it, Dave Costello. We differ on that one, but I think Rising Sun is just brilliant. Looking for My Life is superb. Any Road is a good opener. Run So Far. Stuck Inside a Cloud is good, and The Devil in the Deep Blue Sea is wonderful. So that was number 8. It's a little bit disjointed because it was basically a set of George demos finished off by Donny and Jeff Lynne. Summer in England, again, similarly disjointed. This might have been higher on the list had it been the original album which George intended for release, but the record company somehow persuaded him, and he could have just stuck two fingers up at them and said no, but he acquiesced. They asked him to replace 4 songs with 4 new songs. They said it wasn't commercial enough. And so unfortunately, great songs like Flying Hour and Lay His Head bit the dust and never to be seen again. I mean, although Flying Hour is now on Spotify, Lay His Head is not available digitally. And Sat Singing and Tears of the World, Tears of the World is available on the 33 and a Third album on Spotify, but Sat Singing is not, I don't think. You could buy it for an extortionate amount of money along with the songs of George Harrison's book in 1992, but we're talking, more money than I'm Me Mine cost in 1980. So anyway, I digress, because Summer in England came out, and the tracks which replaced the old ones are decent in a couple of cases. That Which I Have Lost is a good replacement, and All Those Years Ago is wonderful tribute to John. Blood from a Clone is a good song. It's a little bit bitter and not a great melody, but it's a good song. And then Teardrops is a kind of overly commercial number which leads off side 2. But the great moments on this album are, in my opinion, Writings on the Wall on side 2, which is just wonderfully philosophical and one of the highlights of George's entire career. And then Life Itself on side 1, brilliant. And Save the World is a very heartfelt plea for just that, to end the album. So I really like that. This album, in places, I don't much like the Hoagie covers. Then we've got number 6, I'm going to choose Extra Texture from 1975, which a lot of people say is rubbish, but it's a very soulful record. And it's not brilliantly produced, in my opinion. Here I would agree with the podcast. I think the production on 33 and a Third is better, but the songs actually are quite heartfelt. Like You is a great opener, although it dates back to 1971, and The Answers at the End is a great ballad, although it goes on too long. This Guitar Can't Keep From Crying is top-notch George. I think Tired of Midnight Blue on side 2 is decent, and Grey Cloudy Lies, and a very honest album about where he was at the time, which was not in a particularly good place. So George's own opinion of that album isn't particularly high. But as I say, nicely sung, heartfelt album, and honest. And I'll come back to that theme, honesty, in an album which is placed higher. So number 5, we're going to put 33 and a Third, which is the follow-up to Extra Texture, which is a lot brighter and happier. He just got with Olivia, and it shows in the lyrics. And the album starts off absolutely wonderfully with Woman Don't You Cry For Me, Dear One and Beautiful Girl, 1, 2, 3 punch. And Then somewhat goes downhill after that, although we've got the great See Yourself closing side one, and we've got a lovely ballad to end the whole album, Learning How to Love You. But a couple of songs on the album are a little bit twee, shall we say, like Crackerbox Palace is trying it too hard to be a hit single, and it was a hit single, so I guess he succeeded, but I just don't particularly like it. And this song is an attempt to be humorous about the My Sweet Lord lawsuit when there's nothing really to laugh about. It's not particularly funny, it's not a particularly good song, it's got no melody at all, and I don't relish playing that song in the intervening years since I bought the album. So that's number 5. Number 4, you're going to be surprised how high this is, Dark Horse from 74, which is the album he toured off in the US, and when he's lost his voice, and he's kind of almost lost his voice in some of the album. But I think it is probably his most honest record in terms of showing his feelings and showing his problems where he was at this stage of his life, which was a little bit adrift. You know, his marriage was splitting up, and he was about to embark on a tour which would turn out to be not very successful. He'd got some negative reviews for Material World, although it had done well commercially. And maybe he was feeling that being a Beatle on his own wasn't all it was cracked up to be, and the honeymoon period had worn off. And now he was feeling the pressures, and he would feel the pressures on that tour. But I think, I go back to the album a lot because I think the opener, Harry's on Tour Express, contains some lovely slide guitar and a decent little tune. And Karen Tyler said that there was a missing vocal track which has been mysteriously deleted, but we'll never know. But anyway, I think it works as an instrumental. And then Simply Shady, I think, is one of my top favourite George Harrison songs of all time. And I just loved the fact that he's so honest about somebody brought the juicer. I thought I'd take a sip. The senses started reeling. Senses took a dip. I think it's just, wonderfully honest. He admitted he was overindulging in alcohol, in drugs, in women, and it's honestly put down in that track. And there's a sort of heartfelt cover of Bye Bye Love, the Everly Brothers number, where he's saying goodbye to Patty, and Maya Love at the end of side 1. I love the slide guitar. Not every track is a winner, but the title track's wonderful. So that was number 4. Number 3, again, you're going to be surprised this is not higher, but this is All Things Must Pass, and there's a couple of reasons for putting this number 3. One, I probably played it too much, got over familiar with it, and 2, even if you think, I tend to think it should have been a double album, but it's sold as a triple album. All the critics write about it as a triple album, and it was priced, and it's certainly priced today as a triple album if you buy it. So I'm going to review it as a triple album, and as such, the Apple Jam is superfluous for me. And the first 4 sides are what make it, and they are truly wonderful. If it had been just a double album, it probably would have been number 1 on my list. But for that reason, I put it at number 3. And also, I wanted to give some love to a couple of other albums which don't get sufficient love from the fans and the critics alike. So that was number 3. Don't get me wrong, it's a masterpiece, sides 1 to 4. Number 2, we've got the Self-Titled album from 1979, which I think was maybe the 3rd album I got from George. I think I had Material World on cassette. I think I had 33 1/3 on cassette. And I think this one was next, although I might have had Dark Horse first. Again, I was buying albums on cassette for a while for some reason. I think because they were convenient for me at school, because I had a little tape recorder in my room. So it was easier to play cassettes than go to one of the other guys in the house and say, can I borrow your turntable? So that was the reason for that. And I just loved this album as soon as it came out. I don't think I bought the single at the time, but I was very disappointed that Blow Away wasn't a huge smash. And all 10 songs are just joyous, infectious, and reflective of the happy time of his life. He just got married, he just had a son, and things were looking up for him. And he was in Hawaii looking at the moon and the sea, and taking a couple of magic mushrooms, and everything about sort of that, that happy period of life is reflected in the songs, and they're wonderfully optimistic. From the opener, Love Comes to Everyone, to the closer, If You Believe. everything you thought is possible if you believe. Not particularly a religious song, but just a general kind of sentiment on life, really, and quite a pertinent one in my opinion. So that was number 2. And then number 1, I've got Material World, because I think this album has been kind of lost in the mist of time. And Terry Wilson in his book says, for a number 1 album, it hardly ever gets talked about, and he's right. And these podcast guys were just dismissing it as thin, saying the tracks are quite good, but it's a bit monotonous and the style is a bit repetitive. Well, I remember when I got this first album first, I was not complaining about the similarity of the style of the songs. In fact, I was admiring of the production. Well, George, you could tell he was a good student of Spector, because he'd taken the good things of Spector's production, the strings, admittedly arranged by John Barham, the same guy who had worked on All Things Must Pass. But similar sort of Spector-esque sound, but without the wall of sound, if you get what I mean, and relying on this good troupe of musicians to record the album, and who are pictured on the inner sleeve. If I could just open it for you. That's George in the middle there, sort of a parody of The Last Supper, with him in this huge garden in LA, with the various things in the background, like a naked woman sort of leaning out the window, and a pram, a woman with a pram and a huge limousine awaiting them, and an empty wheelchair, which someone was saying may be reflecting his mother, who just passed away a few years before. So a bit of a struggle for George to reconcile being his spiritual quest, getting closer to God, with the fact that he was a multimillionaire rock star. And he doesn't altogether successfully address that dichotomy or that conflict. But it's interesting for that reason alone. And I think a lot of the critics were sort of criticising this album when it first came out for being too preachy. But I think if you listen to it carefully, it's George sort of looking in the mirror and saying, become a better person. Occasionally he's pointing the finger at the audience, but on the whole it's quite a reflective, self-critical album, and very heartfelt and compassionate, I would say. So the reviews at the time, so what we've talked about the production, the guitar, I just want to mention the guitar, because the thing about All Things Must Pass, the guitar work is superb, but a lot of it's played by Eric Clapton. And here, Eric Clapton, thankfully, is not in sight, and George does this guitar work all on his own, and it's wonderful. The solo on The Lord Loves the One is just to die for, and the guitar work on Give Me Love is just absolutely brilliant. Superb slide guitar on Sue Me, Sue You Blues. Lovely little guitar solo in short one on The Light That Has Lighted the World. And Terry Wilson said the too much piano and organ and sax on this album, but I think they work well. I think Gary Wright and Nicky Hopkins are playing extremely sensitively and in tune with the need of the song. And nothing wrong with Jim Keltner's drumming, by the way, in my opinion. Melodies all over this album, very strong, on a par with All Things Must Pass, in my opinion. And obviously that's not an easy statement to make, but I do listen to this album as much as I listen to All Things Must Pass, if not more. Now the words, okay, some people had a problem with it, but for example, Tony Tyler absolutely laid into this album, saying it's so holy I could scream. And it just, annoys me when people get annoyed with religious, spiritual lyrics, in the same way that a few people, when they're ranking Dylan's albums, they put Saved second to bottom or something ludicrous like that, when it's a wonderfully spiritual and loving album, admittedly, about his love of God and Jesus, but absolutely nothing wrong with the songs and nothing wrong with the feeling and the emotion. And Saved is one of my top 10 Dylan albums, and some people put it next to bottom because they're offended by the lyrics for some reason. So that's not me. I just want to show you what Bob Whiffenden, in this superb Beatles Apart book, which came out in 1981, what does he say? The first thing to say is that it was a very good album. George was firstly an excellent guitarist, and secondly an excellent producer, and thirdly a very talented songwriter, though no longer an underrated one. So he's positive about it. Ross Michaels in this book, which is falling apart. I need to get another copy of this if I could ever find it. But what is he saying about material world? Let me see. I can't find the passage, but he's basically covering the point I was just making about the lyrics not altogether successfully resolving, the contradiction of being a multi-million rock star with drugs and women and booze at his command, with being this spiritual seeker and gardener, I suppose. So I think material world. I just want to show you my sheet music of this, which is pretty cool. Which actually has a poster of the inner sleeve in the back of it, which I haven't detached from the book, and I don't intend to. It's not in mint condition, so it's not worth a lot, but it's nice to pick up if you see it. So my George Harrison solo rankings are here, and sorry if you disagree. It's only my opinion. Not really trying to be objective. Or listen to it with a particularly critical ear. This is just what I think on this particular day, and reflective of how often I go back to these albums, which really does vary. And if you're surprised that Cloud 9 is so low, well, that's the reality. I don't really go back to Cloud 9 very often for various reasons, and I find myself digging out those other albums nearer the top a whole lot more often. So thank you for watching as always, and we'll see you next time.